A 9-year-old girl surprises everyone by fixing a millionaire's old car in the middle of the street. What seemed like an innocent gesture soon turns into an encounter with the past and a forgotten secret. She carries the legacy of a wronged inventor and the key to an automotive revolution. But when powerful interests try to silence her discovery, a battle begins that goes far beyond engines. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Emily Grace was only 9 years old, but her dark eyes already carried the wisdom of someone who had lived much longer. Born in the Hope Hill community in Chicago, she had grown up watching her grandfather Samuel fix engines in the small improvised workshop he maintained behind the wooden house where they lived. "Mechanics isn't just about parts, Emmy," he would say as his calloused hands disassembled and reassembled engines with surgical precision. "It's about understanding the soul of machines." When her grandfather passed away 3 years ago, he left behind 3 worn leather notebooks filled with notes, technical drawings, and a revolutionary vision. An automotive hybrid system that could transform the industry. For Emily Grace, those notebooks were more valuable than any inheritance. She studied them every night by the light of a weak lamp, after preparing dinner for her grandmother Dorothy, bedridden for months with heart problems, and for her 5-year-old twin brothers, David and Matthew. Emily Grace's routine began at 5 in the morning. She tidied the house, prepared breakfast, helped her grandmother with her medications, and took her brothers to the community daycare before rushing to the public school. In the afternoon, she sold chocolate fudge balls at traffic lights on Michigan Avenue, always carrying in her worn backpack a small toolkit and one of her grandfather's notebooks. On weekends, she helped neighbors with small electrical repairs in exchange for groceries or a few coins. "This girl has blessed hands," the residents would comment when she fixed broken fans, old radios, and even damaged cell phones. No one understood how such a small child could comprehend complex circuits with such ease. The teachers at school noticed her brilliance in science and math classes. But like many misunderstood geniuses, Emily Grace faced skepticism from adults who judged her arrogant for correcting technical explanations or proposing alternative solutions. That Wednesday had started like any other. She had left school, stopped by the small market to buy milk for the twins using money from her chocolate sales, when she decided to cross Liberty Square to save time. It was there that she saw the commotion. A turquoise-blue Volkswagen Beetle 1972 model, perfectly restored, was parked with its hood open. Men in suits and ties gestured irritably, while a gray-haired gentleman, visibly upset, shouted into his phone, "I've already called 3 mechanics. How can no one fix this? It's just a car, for God's sake." Emily Grace slowly approached, observing the growing crowd watching the spectacle of the rich man losing his composure. A mechanic, in overalls dirty with grease, was coming out from under the car, shaking his head. "Mr. Miller, it's not something simple. It seems electrical, but it could also be the carburetor. A car this old has systems we don't see anymore today." Emily Grace observed the engine for a few moments. Her gaze went from one part to another, mapping connections, following the flow of energy. Suddenly, her eyes lit up with recognition. That engine had a peculiarity her grandfather had mentioned in his notebooks. She took 2 steps forward, stopping, beside the mechanic who was cleaning his hands on a grimy cloth. "The problem is the coil, it's connected wrong," she said in a low but firm voice. The mechanic laughed. The businessman looked down and saw the small girl in a worn school uniform and mismatched sneakers, one black, one white, both worn out. Her backpack had patches of colorful fabric, and her curly hair was tied in an improvised bun. "Go back to school, girl." "This isn't child's play," said the mechanic, adjusting his dirty cap. "I know how to fix it," insisted Emily Grace, meeting the gaze of the businessman who was now watching her with curiosity. "Give me 5 minutes." The laughter around increased. Someone muttered something about cheeky child. Another commented that parents don't teach respect anymore. Emily Grace remained impassive, her eyes fixed on the businessman, who after a moment of hesitation nodded affirmatively. 5 minutes, he said, consulting his gold wristwatch. "And if you break anything else, The responsibility is yours. Emily. Grace left her backpack on the ground and approached the engine like someone approaching an old friend. With precise gestures, she disconnected cables, released a small metal cover, and exposed the ignition system. Her small fingers worked with surgical precision, repositioning the coil and adjusting a connection that was loose. She didn't speak a single word during the entire process. The crowd, previously noisy, now observed in reverential silence. After exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds, she closed the compartment, cleaned her hands on a tissue she took from her pocket, and looked at the businessman. "You can start it now." The man, still skeptical, got into the car and turned the key. The Beetle's engine came to life immediately, with a healthy and stable rumble that showed no sign of the previous problem. The silence in the square was broken by spontaneous applause. The businessman got out of the car, astonished, and took his wallet from the inside pocket of his suit. "This deserves a reward. How much do you want, girl?" Emily Grace adjusted her backpack on her shoulders and shook her head. "I don't want charity." Her childish voice carried surprising dignity. "I just did what I know how to do." Before the businessman could insist, she turned and walked away, disappearing among the passers-by who were returning to their routines. Richard Miller, CEO of Miller Automotive, one of the largest parts manufacturers in the country, remained motionless, watching the small silhouette move away. It wasn't just the surprise at the perfect repair that left him speechless. It was something deeper, an uncomfortable feeling that he couldn't name. Only hours later, sitting in his office on the 20th floor of a glass building, did he understand. It was guilt. Guilt for having doubted, for having allowed people to laugh, for having offered money as if it were just a curiosity and not a demonstration of extraordinary talent. That night, while Emily Grace served vegetable soup to her brothers and checked her grandmother's medications, Richard couldn't forget the determined look of that child. And something about the turquoise blue Beetle, something about the way she had touched that specific engine, awakened a distant memory that he couldn't quite place. A connection that, without knowing, would forever change the destiny of both. 3 days passed since the meeting in the square, and Emily Grace couldn't forget the turquoise blue Beetle. There was something familiar about that engine, a technical signature that she had recognized from her grandfather's notebooks. During classes, she scribbled diagrams in the margins of her notebook, trying to remember exactly what she had seen. Teacher Denise confiscated her notebook when she saw her drawing instead of paying attention in English class. "Daydreams won't get you out of here, Emily Grace," said the teacher, with the usual mixture of concern and strictness. "Your potential is too great to waste." After class, on the way to pick up the twins from daycare, a black BMW parked beside her. The window smoothly rolled down, revealing the face of the businessman with the Beetle. His eyes, less arrogant now, examined the girl with curiosity. "I need to talk to you," said Richard, extending a card with his name and phone number. "About the car." Emily Grace hesitated, but took the card. "I have to pick up my brothers and take medicine to my grandmother." "I can wait," he replied, surprising himself with the unusual patience. "I'll drive you home afterward." An hour later, with the twins asleep in the back seat of the luxury car, Richard drove slowly through the narrow streets of Hope Hill, feeling out of place among colorful shacks and tight alleys. He parked in front of Emily Grace's house, a simple but clean and organized construction, with potted plants decorating the entrance. "Do you want to come in?" she asked, adjusting her younger brother in her arms. "Grandma made cornbread today." Richard had never been in a place like this. He observed the small, clean room, with worn furniture and old photographs on the walls. Dorothy, sitting in an improvised recliner chair, received him with silent dignity, while Emily Grace put her brothers to bed and returned with 3 cups of coffee. "That Beetle was special," Richard began, after the initial greetings. "It belonged to my father. I've kept it for years, rarely drive it." "It has a different configuration," commented Emily Grace, not realizing that she spoke with the authority of an expert. "The coil has a dual connection with the distributor. My grandfather explained this in his notebooks." Richard leaned forward, suddenly interested. "What notebooks?" Emily Grace disappeared for a moment and returned with 3 leather-bound notebooks worn by time and handling. She opened one of them to the page showing the diagram of a modified ignition system, identical to the Beatles. My grandfather worked with engines. He said he discovered a way to make cars run better using less fuel. Richard flipped through the notebooks with trembling hands. Precise diagrams, complex calculations, detailed notes, all in a handwriting he immediately recognized. The same handwriting present in old letters kept in the drawer of his office, letters signed by Samuel Olsen. "Samuel," he murmured, feeling his heart race. "Was he your grandfather?" Dorothy, who had been observing silently, intervened with a fragile but firm voice. "Did you know my Samuel?" Richard looked at the elderly woman, and then at an old photograph on the wall. A dark-haired man with a broad smile next to a turquoise-blue Beetle. In the background, the old factory of Alves Automotive before it became Miller Automotive. "Samuel." "Olsen was my godfather," said Richard, his voice choked by the unexpected revelation, "and partner to my biological father in the old factory." The silence that followed was interrupted only by the ticking of the wall clock and the heavy breathing of Dorothy, who brought her hands to her mouth. "Your little Richard, the son of Anthony and Helen?" Richard nodded, unable to speak. Fragmented memories of his childhood returned. Visits to this same community, a kind man who would put him on his lap and tell stories about magical engines, a woman with a sweet smile who made cornbread. "My parents died in an accident when I was 5 years old," explained Richard finally. "I was adopted by the Millers, majority partners in the factory. I grew up as their son, inherited the business, and forgot my origins." Emily Grace observed the scene with the analytical gaze she applied to engines, connecting pieces of a larger story that she was beginning to understand. "Grandpa said his project was stolen," she commented innocently, "that someone took the original designs but couldn't make it work because the main piece was missing." Richard closed the notebooks, thoughtful. "My adoptive father, Charles Miller, always said he legally bought the patents from Samuel and Anthony after the accident, that he paid well for them." Dorothy shook her head. "Mr. Samuel never sold anything. That system was his dream. It was going to revolutionize everything. The Millers' proposal was a partnership, but Mr. Samuel refused. He wanted it to be accessible to everyone, not just the rich." A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. His entire life, his entire business empire was potentially built on a lie. "What happened to the original project?" he finally asked. Emily Grace pointed to a small wooden box on the shelf. "The key piece is there. Grandpa built it by hand, but he never managed to produce it at scale before he passed." With Dorothy's permission, Richard opened the box. Inside was a shiny metal valve, small and apparently simple, but with a complex internal design that he had never seen before. "It's a hybrid flow regulator," explained Emily Grace, with the naturalness of someone discussing the weather. "It allows the engine to alternate between different fuels without losing efficiency. Grandpa said it could reduce consumption by up to 70%. Richard examined the piece with amazement. If it worked as described, this wasn't worth millions. It was worth billions. It could transform the global automotive industry. And there it was, stored in a wooden box, in a simple house in Hope Hill, in the hands of a 9-year-old girl. "Emily Grace," said Richard after a long contemplative silence, "do you understand? This project, could you explain it to engineers?" The girl nodded without hesitation. "I studied every page of the notebooks. Grandpa taught me to read projects even before I learned to read words." Richard looked at Dorothy, then at Samuel's photograph, and finally at Emily Grace. A decision was forming in his mind, a decision that could redeem years of unconscious injustice, but also risk everything he had built. "I have a proposal," he said, returning the valve to the box. "Miller Automotive has a young apprentice program. Officially, you're too young to participate, but I can make an exception." Emily Grace's eyes lit up. "Working with real engines?" "More than that," continued Richard. "Creating a special laboratory to develop your grandfather's project. With engineers, equipment, everything necessary, you would be the chief apprentice, receive a salary and assistance for your family. Dorothy tried to protest, concerned about her granddaughter, but Richard continued. I have a debt to Samuel, to your biological parents, Emily Grace, and to you. The girl looked at her grandmother, then at her grandfather's notebooks, and finally at Richard. Can I continue studying? It's mandatory, he smiled. Knowledge is never too much. And my brothers and grandma, we'll take care of everything, assured Richard. Medical assistance for Dorothy, private school for the twins, and a more suitable house right here in the neighborhood if you prefer. Dorothy held the businessman's hand with surprising strength for someone so fragile. Why would you do this for us? Richard looked again at Samuel's photograph. Because some debts can't be paid with money, Dorothy. Some require acts of justice. The next morning, Emily Grace woke up earlier than usual. She got ready carefully, put her grandfather's 3 notebooks in her backpack along with the wooden box containing the special valve. Before leaving, she stopped in front of Samuel's photograph. I'll make it work, Grandpa, she whispered, touching the glass of the frame with her fingertips. Just like you always dreamed. When she went out to the street, the turquoise-blue Beetle was waiting with Richard at the wheel. The girl got into the car, feeling the original leather upholstery and the characteristic smell of a well-maintained old vehicle. As they drove down the hill toward the headquarters of Miller Automotive, she observed the familiar streets with new eyes. The world had expanded for Emily Grace, and within her, the seed of hope began to sprout. Nervous? Asked Richard, observing her out of the corner of his eye. No, replied Emily Grace, firmly holding her backpack against her chest. I'm where I should be. The immense industrial complex of Miller Automotive stood imposingly in the east side of Chicago. Emily Grace, in her worn school uniform, felt tiny as she crossed the security gates, where guards in impeccable uniforms looked curiously at the child accompanying the CEO. The receptionist of the main building, a woman in a grey suit and perfect bun, could barely disguise her surprise when Richard instructed her to issue a permanent badge for the girl. Full access to the special laboratory, he ordered, ignoring the questioning look of the employee, and provide an appropriate uniform. She starts today. In the mirrored elevator that took them to the 10th floor, Emily Grace observed her reflection. Disheveled curly hair, patched backpack, mismatched shoes, and for the first time felt inadequate. Richard seemed to notice her discomfort. Everyone starts somewhere, Emily Grace, he commented, adjusting his tie. I myself started as an intern in this company before discovering I was the founder's biological son. The special laboratory turned out to be a large research and development space with impeccable workbenches, state-of-the-art equipment, and huge windows that provided a panoramic view of the city. 5 engineers, all in white lab coats and serious expressions, waited at a meeting table. Gentlemen, began Richard, keeping his hand on Emily Grace's shoulder, this is Emily Grace Olson. She will be our special consultant on the new hybrid engine project. The incredulous looks alternated between the girl and the CEO. A middle-aged man with a graying beard and thick-framed glasses was the first to speak up. With all due respect, Mr. Miller, but is this some kind of joke? We're talking about a multi-million-dollar project. Richard smiled, unperturbed. Dr. Fields, this girl fixed my 72 Beetle in 5 minutes when 3 experienced mechanics failed. More importantly, she is the granddaughter of Samuel Olson, the true creator of the system we intend to develop. A murmur ran through the room. The name Samuel Olson was almost mythical in American automotive engineering circles, a genius who had disappeared from the market decades ago, taking with him revolutionary projects that were never patented. Emily Grace, continued Richard, please show them. With slightly trembling hands but determination in her gaze, the girl opened her worn backpack and took out her grandfather's 3 notebooks. She placed them on the meeting table, and beside them the small wooden box containing the valve. My grandfather developed a hybrid engine system that can reduce fuel consumption by up to 70%, she explained, with a firm voice despite her nervousness. The secret is in this regulator valve. The engineers approached, initially skeptical, but soon absorbed in the detailed diagrams and precise notes. Dr. Fields, the most experienced, examined the valve with reverence, like someone holding a relic. "This is extraordinary," he murmured after long minutes. "The internal configuration allows fuel alternation without power loss. I've never seen anything like this." "And does it work?" asked another engineer, younger and visibly excited. "Emily." Grace nodded. "On paper, yes. Grandpa built a prototype that worked on a reduced scale, but he never had the resources to develop it full size." Richard observed the scene with growing satisfaction. The initial doubt was rapidly transforming into respect and genuine scientific curiosity. "Dr. Fields," he said, "from today this is our priority project. I want a development schedule in 48 hours, and Emily Grace will participate in all stages." "But sir," protested a female engineer with short hair, "she has classes, I suppose, and there are legal issues about child labor." "We'll adjust the schedule for afternoons and some weekends," replied Richard. "As for legal issues, she'll be registered as an apprentice in a special educational program. I've already spoken with our legal department." The following weeks completely transformed Emily Grace's life. In the morning, she attended the new private school where she had been enrolled along with her brothers. In the afternoon, after a quick lunch, she was taken to the special laboratory, where she worked side by side with the engineers, explaining her grandfather's concepts, learning new technical terms, absorbing knowledge as quickly as she breathed. The free project progressed at an accelerated pace. The original valve had been digitized and replicated with 3D metal printing technology, allowing adjustments and improvements to the design. Computer simulations confirmed Samuel's calculations. The TO system could indeed revolutionize the industry. At home, the changes were equally significant. The family had moved to a larger house, still in Hope Hill, but with an adequate structure for Dorothy's treatment, who now had a private nurse. The twins, well-fed and happy in the new school, were no longer the chocolate boys and had become promising students. On a particularly productive afternoon, while explaining a complex diagram to two engineers, Emily Grace noticed an unusual movement. A man in an expensive suit and arrogant expression entered the laboratory accompanied by Richard, who seemed uncomfortable. "So this is where you've been spending millions over the last few months," commented the visitor, observing the environment with a critical eye. "And this is the famous prodigy girl." Richard made the formal introductions. "Emily Grace, this is Paul Sanders, a member of the administrative board and our financial director." The man examined the girl with barely disguised contempt. "Impressive. Richard, a 9-year-old leading a multi-million-dollar project. The board will love to hear about this." "The project is viable, Paul," replied Richard, tense. "The simulations confirm everything." "Simulations aren't reality," retorted Paul, distractedly flipping through one of Samuel's notebooks. "We need concrete results. The market doesn't—" "Wait." After the visitor's departure, Richard seemed worried. "Don't mind him, Emily Grace. Paul has always been a numbers man, not an innovation man." But the seed of doubt had been planted. That night at home, Emily Grace heard for the first time the comments from neighbors. "The rich girl now," some said. "Thinks she's better than everyone with her factory job," others whispered, at the yum. New school classmates either avoided her as strange or surrounded her with excessive curiosity. "What's it like working with adults?" they asked. "Is it true you earn more than our parents?" others provoked. Emily Grace felt divided between two worlds, without truly belonging to either of them. At home, the brothers demanded her attention as before, but she arrived exhausted from the long afternoons in the laboratory. Her grandmother, although in better health, worried about the intense pace her granddaughter maintained. "Children need time to be children, Emmy," said Dorothy, caressing her hair while she studied advanced equations to keep up with discussions with the engineers. One morning during science class, the teacher asked Emily Grace to explain to her classmates how an internal combustion engine worked, a subject she mastered with expertise. In the middle of the explanation, using technical terminology without realizing it, she noticed the confused looks of her classmates and the condescending smile of the teacher. "Did anyone understand anything?" "Emily Grace said?" asked the teacher, provoking laughter in the room. "Sometimes we know so much that we forget how to speak the language of common mortals." The comment, although apparently harmless, deeply hurt Emily Grace. Was she losing the ability to communicate with normal people? Was she becoming a stranger in her own world? In the laboratory, these personal doubts were momentarily forgotten, given the constant advancement of the project. After 2 months of intense work, the crucial moment was approaching: the construction of the first full-scale prototype. "Tomorrow we begin assembly," announced Dr. Fields, who had become an ally and mentor to Emily Grace. "If all goes well, in 2 weeks we'll have the first practical test." That night, unable to sleep with the excitement of the news, Emily Grace sat on the small porch of her house, observing the city lights in the distance. She took from her pocket the small necklace that Richard had given her weeks ago, a pendant in the shape of a wrench made of the same metal as the original valve. "To never forget who opened this door," he had said when presenting it to her. The full moon illuminated Hope Hill, casting soft shadows over the colorful rooftops. From where she sat, Emily Grace could see both the skyscrapers of the financial center and the simple houses around. 2 worlds, 1 city, just as she now lived between 2 universes. "I'll make it, Grandpa," she whispered to the night. "I'll make your dream work." A gentle breeze stirred her hair, as if it were a silent response. And for the first time in weeks, Emily Grace allowed herself to smile without reservations. The challenges were many, the uncertainties even more. But there, in that moment suspended between day and night, between childhood and something new that still had no name, she felt she was walking in the right direction. The future awaited, mechanical and unpredictable like the engines she loved so much, and she was just beginning to understand her own potential. The date for the first official test of the prototype was rapidly approaching. The laboratory buzzed with activity, with engineers working in extended shifts to meet the established deadline. The engine had been mounted on a special structure, with the revolutionary regulator valve installed in the center of the system. For Emily Grace, each adjusted screw, each completed weld was a step toward her grandfather's dream. On the eve of the big day, Richard gathered the entire team for a special announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow will not just be a technical test," he announced with contained enthusiasm. "I've invited members of the administrative board, selected journalists, and potential investors. If the test is successful, we'll officially announce Project Olsen to the world." A buzz of excitement ran through the laboratory. Only Emily Grace remained quiet, feeling an unexpected weight on her shoulders. What was previously a personal project, an intimate connection with her grandfather's legacy, was suddenly transforming into a public spectacle. "All ready for tomorrow, little engineer?" asked Dr. Fields, approaching with a paternal smile. "Almost." "Everything," she replied, examining the engine with a critical eye. "But I wanted to review the electrical connections one more time." The engineer consulted his watch. "It's already past 7. Your grandmother must be worried. Leave that to the night team." Reluctantly, Emily Grace put away her tools and prepared to leave. Richard, who was observing the scene, approached. "Tomorrow will be a big day for all of us, Emily Grace," he said, accompanying her to the elevator, "especially for you and your grandfather's legacy." During the ride home, in the comfort of the car with a driver that now transported her daily, Emily Grace tried to calm her growing anxiety. Something was bothering her, a persistent intuition that they had forgotten some crucial detail. She mentally consulted the diagrams, the equations, the measurements, but couldn't identify the problem. At home, even after dinner with her brothers and grandmother, the sensation persisted. She took her grandfather's oldest notebook from the shelf and flipped through it for hours, looking for any note that she might have overlooked. That's when she noticed, almost erased by time, a marginal observation on the last page. "Main valve, critical temperature 155 degrees C, requires additional cooling and industrial configuration." Emily Grace felt her heart race. The prototype's cooling system had been dimensioned according to conventional standards, without considering the additional heat generated by the special valve in continuous operation. In the computerized simulations, this factor hadn't appeared because the thermal parameters used were standard. Immediately, she tried to call Richard, but the call went to voicemail. She sent an urgent message to Dr. Fields explaining the discovery. The response came quickly but was disappointing. "We've checked everything. Cooling system adequate. Rest, little one. Pre-test nervousness is normal." Too restless to sleep, Emily Grace spent the night redesigning the cooling system in her school notebook, calculating the necessary modifications. At dawn, exhausted but determined, she put on the company uniform and waited for the driver who would take her to the most important day of her short career. The special laboratory had been transformed for the event. An observation area with comfortable chairs had been set up at a safe distance from the prototype. Banners with the Miller Automotive logo decorated the walls, and a coffee break table awaited the guests. Richard, in his most elegant suit, personally, received each important visitor. Emily Grace ran to the technical area, where Dr. Fields and the team were making the final adjustments. "We need to modify the cooling system," she said, breathless, extending her notebook with the overnight calculations. "The valve will overheat." The engineer quickly examined the notes. "Impossible to make changes now, Emily Grace. The guests are already arriving, and the test is scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. "But," Grandpa left a note, "the valve has a thermal limit of 105 degrees, and our current system only controls up to 95 degrees in normal condition, but prolonged operation will raise it beyond that." Dr. Fields hesitated. "Your concerns are valid, but we've already done 3 thermal simulations. The system should handle the 15-minute test without problems. Afterward, we can implement your suggestions for the final version." Before Emily Grace could protest again, Richard approached, accompanied by Paul Sanders and other executives in formal attire. "Ah, there's our young genius," exclaimed Richard with excessive enthusiasm. "Gentlemen, this is Emily Grace Olson, granddaughter of the legendary Samuel Olson, and a fundamental piece of this project." The executives observed the girl with educated curiosity, while Paul maintained a skeptical smile. "I hope this $1 million investment isn't just disguised philanthropy, Richard," he commented, without bothering to lower his voice. "The project is solid, Paul," replied Richard, tense, "and today everyone will see that." Emily Grace tried once more. "Richard, we need to postpone the test. There's a problem with the cooling system that—" "We can't postpone," he interrupted, with firmness disguised by a diplomatic smile. "We have the press, investors, the entire board here. It will be just a short test, 15 minutes at most. Any adjustments can be made afterward." The testing room was open to the public. About 30 people settled into the chairs while the engineers took their posts. Emily Grace, relegated to a secondary position due to the presence of important visitors, observed the temperature monitor with growing apprehension. Dr. Fields gave a brief technical presentation explaining the system's operation without revealing proprietary details. Richard complimented with an enthusiastic speech about the future of sustainable mobility and Miller Automotive's commitment to innovation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment everyone has been waiting for. The first official test of the Olson system. An engineer turned the ignition key. The engine came to life with a soft, almost silent rumble, the first sign of its exceptional operation. Spontaneous applause arose from the audience, while the technicians monitored the indicators. The first minutes were perfect. The engine automatically alternated between conventional fuel and ethanol, maintaining constant power with significantly reduced consumption. "Look at the consumption indicators," pointed Dr. Fields proudly. 65% reduction compared to conventional engines, maintaining the same power. More applause. Cameras captured the moment. Even Paul Sanders seemed impressed. Only Emily Grace remained tense, watching the thermal monitor where the valve's temperature was steadily rising. 85 to go, 90 to go, 95 to go. "We need to shut down," she whispered to the technician beside her. "The temperature is rising too fast." "Parameters still normal," he replied, without taking his eyes off the main panel. We have a safety margin. At 10 minutes of continuous operation, the engine continued to run perfectly, but the valve's temperature reached 100 degrees. Emily Grace bit her lip, feeling anxiety transform into panic. She tried to approach Richard, but was blocked by security guards protecting the VIP area. 2 degrees C, 103 degrees C, 104 degrees C. A slight tremor began to run through the engine. Dr. Fields, noticing the anomaly, frowned and approached the control panel. "We're registering abnormal vibration," he commented to the chief technician. "Check the supports." 550s. 406 "Shut it down now," shouted Emily Grace, running toward the main panel. The security guard tried to stop her, but she slipped under his arm and reached the emergency button. Too late. A metallic boom reverberated through the laboratory, followed by a small explosion in the valve area. Sparks and smoke emerged from the engine, while the security system automatically triggered fire extinguishers. The audience rose in panic, running for the emergency exit. In seconds, what would have been a triumph transformed into disaster. Technicians ran from one side to another, shutting down equipment and checking for damage. Richard, pale, tried to calm the guests. Paul Sanders observed everything with an expression that mixed shock and something close to satisfaction. When the smoke dissipated and the preliminary assessment was completed, the verdict was devastating. The regulator valve had completely melted due to overheating, damaging adjacent components. The prototype, the result of months of intense work and millions in investment, was rendered useless. In the meeting room an hour later, the mood was funereal. Richard paced from one side to another, visibly shaken. Dr. Fields and the technical team reviewed data, trying to understand what had gone wrong. Emily Grace, sitting alone in a corner, held her grandfather's notebook open to the page with the note about the thermal limit. "How could this happen?" asked Richard, finally breaking the tense silence. All simulations indicated normal operation. "The simulations used conventional thermal parameters," explained Dr. Fields, exhausted. "We didn't consider that the special valve would generate additional heat in prolonged operation." "And why didn't we consider that?" Richard's voice rose dangerously. An embarrassing silence filled the room. Then Emily Grace stood up and walked to the center, holding the open notebook. "I tried to warn this morning," she said, with a trembling but determined voice. "Grandpa left a note about the thermal limit. I did the calculations for the new cooling system, but no one would listen." Richard took the notebook, confirming the note and the meticulous calculations made by the girl. His expression transformed from anger to guilt, and finally to deep sadness. "She's right," confirmed Dr. Fields, examining the notes. "If we had implemented these modifications, the accident wouldn't have occurred." The door opened abruptly, and Paul Sanders entered, followed by 2 other board members. "Complete disaster, Richard," he announced, not hiding the accusatory tone. "Millions thrown away to satisfy your charity project with this child." "The girl tried to warn about the problem," defended Dr. Fields. "We didn't listen." Paul ignored the comment. "The board will hold an extraordinary meeting tomorrow to re-evaluate the continuation of this project. Until then, the laboratory is temporarily closed." After the executive's departure, a heavy silence dominated the room. The technical team gradually withdrew, leaving only Richard and Emily Grace. "I really tried to warn," she whispered, holding back tears. "I know," replied Richard, sitting heavily beside her. "The fault isn't yours. It's mine for not listening to you." The driver took Emily Grace home in silence. Upon arriving, she couldn't hide her dejection. Dorothy, immediately perceiving that something serious had occurred, didn't ask questions. She just hugged her granddaughter tightly, offering the silent comfort that only grandmothers know how to give. That night, at the small desk in her room, Emily Grace removed the wrench-shaped pendant that Richard had given her and placed it on top of her grandfather's notebooks. The tears she had contained throughout the day finally escaped. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," she sobbed, hugging the notebook against her chest. "I failed." For a long time, she contemplated abandoning the project, returning to the normal life of a 9-year-old child without pressures, without crushing expectations. without adults who didn't take her seriously until it was too late. Maybe it would be better that way. Maybe the dream was too big for such a small girl. The valve was destroyed. The prototype rendered useless, the investors' confidence shaken, and most importantly, the only real opportunity to realize her grandfather's dream seemed irrevocably lost. Outside the window, night fell over Hope Hill, enveloping in shadows the city that, for a brief moment, had almost witnessed a revolution. 3. Days passed since the disaster in the laboratory. Emily Grace hadn't received any call or message from Richard or the team. The news of the test failure had leaked to some media outlets, and sensationalist headlines mocked the prodigy child, who blew up millions. At school, the pitying looks and snickers in the hallways made each minute a small torture. At home, Emily Grace had stored her grandfather's notebooks in a box under the bed, along with the wrench pendant and her company lab coat. She tried to resume her previous routine, taking care of her brothers, helping her grandmother, studying normal subjects for children her age. But the sparkle had disappeared from her eyes, and her restless and curious spirit seemed dormant. On the TDI morning of the 4th day, while preparing breakfast for the twins, the doorbell rang. Dorothy, now more agile with the medical treatment, went to answer. Minutes later, she called her granddaughter to the living room. "A lady wants to talk to you, Emmy. Says it's important." In the small living room, an elderly woman was waiting, sitting elegantly on the edge of the sofa. Short white hair framed a face marked by time, but with lively and attentive eyes that examined everything around her. She wore simple but good quality clothes and held a worn leather folder. "Emily." "Grace Olson?" she asked with a firm and decisive voice. "I'm Helen Vargas. I worked with your grandfather Samuel many years ago." The girl sat down slowly, intrigued. She had never heard her grandmother mention this woman. "You knew my grandfather?" Helen smiled, her face softening with the memory. "I knew him very well. I was an engineer at Alves Automotive. In the 80s, when your grandfather developed the first prototype of the hybrid system, we were a small but brilliant team." Dorothy, who was observing the scene from the door, approached with a surprised expression. "Helen Vargas, the engineer who went to the United States." "The same," confirmed the visitor. "I left the United States after the incident. I thought I would never return. But then I saw this yesterday." She extended a tablet where a news story highlighted the failure of the test at Miller Automotive, with a blurry photo of Emily Grace being escorted out of the laboratory. "The moment I saw your face, I knew who you were. You have his eyes, the same determined look." Helen paused, studying the girl's reaction. "And from what I understand, you're trying to complete the work he began." Emily Grace lowered her eyes. "I was, but it failed. The main valve melted during the test." "Overheating?" asked Helen, as if she already knew the answer. "Yes. I tried to warn, but no one would listen. Now the project is suspended, and the original valve is destroyed." Helen opened her folder and took out a small object wrapped in fabric. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a valve identical to the one that had been destroyed in the test. The same shiny metal, the same peculiar design. "This is the second valve that Samuel built," she explained, while Emily Grace and Dorothy observed astonished. "He always made two of everything, a habit he acquired when young. One to test, one to keep," he would say. Emily Grace took the valve with trembling hands, examining every detail with reverent admiration. "How do you have this?" Helen's face darkened slightly. "Samuel gave it to me to keep the week before the accident that took Richard's parents. He feared something would happen to the project, that the wrong people would discover its potential before it was ready to be shared with everyone." The elderly woman opened the folder again and took out an old notebook, very similar to those Emily Grace had inherited. "This is my notebook from that time. It contains notes complementary to Samuel's, especially about the cooling system, which was my specialty." Flipping through the notebook, Emily Grace discovered detailed diagrams of a special cooling system designed specifically for the hybrid valve. "This would have prevented the accident," she murmured, feeling a mixture of hope and regret. "The cooling system wasn't just a compliment, Emily Grace," explained Helen with growing intensity. It was an integral part of the design. Samuel and I worked as a team, him on the heart of the engine, me on the support systems. Together, we created something revolutionary. But why did you disappear? Why did you never look for Grandma after Grandpa passed? Helen exchanged a significant look with Dorothy before answering. It's a long and complicated story. After Anthony and his wife died in the accident, and little Richard was adopted by the Millers, the atmosphere in the company changed. Charles Miller began to pressure Samuel to sell the project. When he refused, a campaign to discredit him began. Miller used his influence to block funding, spread rumors about the project's unfeasibility, continued Helen, with bitterness in her voice. They tried to buy me to reveal the technical secrets that Samuel hadn't fully documented. When I refused, they threatened my career. Samuel insisted that I accept a job offer in the United States for my own safety. Emily Grace absorbed every word, connecting dots of a much larger story than she had imagined. And you kept the second valve all this time? I kept it, waiting for the right moment. Samuel said that someday someone with a pure heart would continue his work, not for personal profit, but for the good of all. From what I've read about you, Emily Grace, that someone is you. The girl hesitated, her confidence shaken by the recent failure. But I failed. The project is closed and no one will listen to me now. Helen smiled, a smile that mixed wisdom and determination. Engineers don't give up when a prototype fails, my dear. They learn, adjust, and try again. Besides, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial tone. I didn't just come to bring the valve, I came to offer my help. Your help, repeated Emily Grace, confused. I have more than 40 years of experience in thermal and mechanical engineering. I worked on cutting-edge projects in the United States and Europe. I've been retired for 5 years, with plenty of time and a debt of honor to Samuel. If you want to continue, I'm willing to be your mentor. The offer hung in the air like an unexpected promise of redemption. Dorothy, who had heard everything in silence, sat beside her granddaughter. Emmy has always been different, said the grandmother, with a voice choked with emotion. Since she was little, she understood things that not even adults comprehended. Samuel said she had a gift, that she saw beyond the parts, saw the soul of machines. Helen nodded. Samuel had that same gift. It's rare, precious, wasting it would be a tragedy. Emily Grace stood up and walked to the living room shelf, where a photograph of her grandfather smiled in a simple frame. For long moments, she contemplated that beloved face, seeking answers in the familiar lines. How would we do it? She finally asked, turning to Helen. We don't have a laboratory, equipment, resources. The elderly woman smiled again, this time with a mischievous gleam in her eyes. My house in Lakeside has a complete workshop in the backyard, first-rate equipment that I brought when I returned to the United States. It's not an industrial laboratory, but it's more than enough to build a functional demonstration prototype. The first glimpse of hope in days illuminated Emily Grace's face, and afterward, even with a working prototype, who would believe in us? A child and a retired lady? Truth has a power of its own, Emily Grace. When something works, it's hard to deny its reality. Helen made a significant pause. Besides, I have contacts in the international scientific community who could independently verify our work. And there's a Sustainable Innovation Fair in Chicago 2 months from now, the same fair where your grandfather planned to present the original project. Emily Grace's phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from Richard. Board meeting. Ended. Project officially cancelled. I'm sorry, my hands are tied. Instead of discouraging her, the message seemed to strengthen her resolution. Emily Grace looked up, a new determination shining in her young eyes. When do we start? Today, if you can, replied Helen with renewed enthusiasm. But we need to be discreet. If Miller Automotive discovers we're continuing the project independently, they would try to stop us, completed Emily Grace, understanding the implications. For intellectual property issues. Exactly. The company may claim rights to the project even though morally it belongs to you as Samuel's heir. Dorothy, who was observing her granddaughter with a mixture of pride and concern, intervened. And school, Emmy? Your studies are important. Helen considered the question for a moment. We can work in the afternoons after school and on weekends. Formal education is important, but this project is also education, of the most valuable kind. That same afternoon, Emily Grace traveled with Helen to Lakeside. The engineer's house was a modest construction in a quiet neighborhood with a large garden in the back where a structure stood that, from the outside, looked like a common garage. Inside, it revealed itself as a fully equipped laboratory with workbenches, precision tools, a small CNC lathe, and testing equipment. "I built this when I returned to the United States 5 years ago," explained Helen, while Emily Grace observed, "Everything with marveled eyes. I couldn't completely abandon engineering in retirement." Together, they spent the rest of the day reviewing the notebooks, Samuel's 3 and Helen's. They compared notes, discussed technical solutions, identified critical points. The girl surprised the retired engineer with her deep understanding and natural intuition. "You really have his gift," commented Helen, observing how Emily Grace identified connections that others would take years to perceive. At nightfall, when they prepared to return to Chicago, Helen paused and looked seriously at her young apprentice. "There's something I need to tell you about the system, Emily Grace. Something that isn't written in any of the notebooks. Something that only Samuel and I knew." The girl waited, intrigued. The valve isn't just a mechanical piece. It incorporates principles that go beyond conventional engineering. Samuel studied natural systems, how plants process energy, how living organisms adapt to different environments. He incorporated these biomimetic principles into the design. Biomimetics, copying nature. Exactly. And that's why the system is so revolutionary and so threatening to the traditional industry. It's not just more efficient. It's fundamentally different in how it approaches energy use. Helen walked to a locked cabinet at the back of the laboratory. She opened it with a small key she wore around her neck and took out a sealed folder. "These are the original documents of the theory behind the system. Samuel never included them in the main notebooks for security. They are the fundamental principles that make the valve possible." She handed the folder to Emily Grace, who received it with reverence. "Study them carefully. When you fully understand, you'll see that what we're building isn't just a better engine. It's a new way of thinking about energy, sustainability, and the relationship between technology and nature." On the way back to Chicago, looking out the car window where the sun was setting on the horizon, Emily Grace felt a spark rekindle in her chest. Not just renewed hope in the project, but something deeper, a connection with her grandfather's legacy that transcended mechanical parts and technical diagrams. The valve secure in her backpack seemed to pulse with possibilities. And for the first time since the disaster in the laboratory, Emily Grace allowed herself to believe again, not just in the project, but in herself. The weeks passed at an accelerated pace. Emily Grace adopted a new routine: school in the morning, quick lunch at home, and almost daily trips to Lakeside, returning late at night to help her brothers with homework and spend a few moments with her grandmother. On weekends, she dedicated herself entirely to the project, often sleeping in the guest room at Helen's house. The prototype advanced steadily. Using the second original valve as the centerpiece, they built a smaller system than the one at Miller Automotive, but more refined. The special cooling system, based on Helen's notes, was implemented with surgical precision. Small partial tests showed promising results, exceeding initial expectations. Helen proved to be an exceptional mentor, rigorous when necessary, patient when she needed to explain complex concepts, and genuinely impressed with Emily Grace's natural technical intuition. More than technical knowledge, she transmitted life wisdom and the confidence that the girl so needed to recover. "Your grandfather would be proud," she commented one afternoon, observing Emily Grace adjusting micro-regulators with millimeter precision. He always said that true talent isn't just in knowledge, but in the ability to see beyond the obvious. The date of the Sustainable Innovation Fair was approaching. Helen had registered the project under the name Olson Vargas Biomimetic Hybrid Propulsion System, listing herself as the principal researcher and Emily Grace as co-researcher. The registration had been accepted without questions. Helen Vargas's name still carried weight in American scientific circles. 2 weeks until the fair, Helen reminded during a shared breakfast. The prototype is almost ready for the final test. Emily Grace nodded, trying to control her growing anxiety. What if it fails like last time? It won't fail. We've considered every variable, tested each component individually. Besides, added Helen with a confident smile, we have something they didn't have in the Miller Automotive Laboratory. What? Patience, true understanding of the fundamental principles, and freedom to follow Samuel's original vision without corporate pressures or artificial deadlines. The final test was scheduled for Saturday, a week before the fair. Everything was meticulously prepared. The demonstration engine, mounted on a transparent platform that allowed visualization of its internal operation, occupied the center of the laboratory. Temperature, pressure, and efficiency sensors would monitor every aspect of performance. On the morning of the big day, Emily Grace woke up feeling unwell. A strong cold, the result of sleepless nights and accumulated exhaustion, left her feverish and with a headache. Dorothy insisted she stay home resting, but the girl categorically refused. "I can't miss today, Grandma. It's the most important test." Even debilitated, she traveled to Lakeside. Helen immediately noticed her condition and suggested postponing the test, but Emily Grace was inflexible. "We're ready. The prototype is ready. I don't want to wait any longer." At 3 in the afternoon, with everything checked one last time, Helen initiated the activation sequence. The engine came to life smoothly, almost without noise, a distinctive characteristic of the system. The indicators showed exceptional performance, reduced consumption by 72%, minimal emissions, stable temperature. Everything was working perfectly. "It's happening," whispered Emily Grace, watching in wonder the performance monitor. "It's really working." Helen smiled, proud, while adjusting some parameters. "Let's extend the test to 30 minutes. Check the prolonged stability." At 20 minutes of continuous operation, when they were celebrating the imminent success, the house intercom rang. Helen answered, frowning as she heard the message. She returned to the laboratory, visibly disturbed. "We have unexpected visitors. Paul Sanders and 2 lawyers from Miller Automotive are at the gate, demanding entry." Emily Grace's blood froze. "How did they find us?" "I don't know. But they can't enter without a judicial warrant. I asked them to wait while I call my lawyer." Minutes later, Helen's lawyer returned the call with alarming news. Miller Automotive had obtained an emergency injunction alleging misuse of intellectual property. The injunction authorized immediate inspection of the laboratory and seizure of any material related to Project Olson. "They have police officers with them," informed Helen, hanging up the phone with trembling hands. "We need to shut down the engine and hide the valve. It's the only original piece they can't legally claim." While they hastily deactivated the EE prototype, Emily Grace questioned, "How did they discover us?" Helen shook her head, disappointed. "Someone must have leaked information. The fair registration wasn't confidential." A flash of recognition appeared in the girl's eyes. "School. Last week the coordinator called me in, asking why I was missing remedial classes in the afternoons. I explained I was working on a scientific project. I mentioned the fair." There was no time for lamentations. Helen barely managed to hide the original valve when the doorbell rang insistently. Reluctantly, she allowed the group entry: Paul Sanders, 2 lawyers in impeccable suits, and 2 uniformed police officers. "Dr. Vargas," greeted Paul with false cordiality, "what a surprise to find you involved in this misappropriation." "There is no misappropriation whatsoever, Mr. Sanders," replied Helen, maintaining her composure. "This project is based on independent research." Paul's eyes found Emily Grace, who remained beside the partially dismantled prototype. "Ah, our little genius. Abandoned school to continue playing inventor?" The lawyers methodically examined the laboratory, photographing equipment and notes. One of them approached the prototype, evaluating it with professional interest. "Seems functional," he commented to Paul. "Similar design to ours, but with substantial modifications." Paul flipped through the judicial documents in his hands. The injunction is clear. All material related to Project Olsen must be seized for analysis of intellectual property violation. This includes prototypes, documentation, and any original parts. Helen interposed herself between Paul and the prototype. I have the right to judicially contest. My lawyer is already taking care of it. Of course, Dr. Vargas, but until the merits are judged, the material remains in judicial custody. Or, as determined here, he pointed to a specific paragraph in the document, in the custody of the requesting party for technical evaluation. Emily Grace, who was observing the scene with growing horror, stepped forward. You can't take everything. This project doesn't belong to Miller Automotive. Paul smiled coldly. Oh, but it does, little one. Your grandfather worked for us when he developed it. All rights were legally acquired by the company. That's a lie, protested Helen. Samuel developed the system independently outside working hours. The company never legally acquired the rights. We have documents that prove otherwise, Dr. Vargas. And now, if you don't mind, the technicians will begin packaging the material. While technicians summoned by Paul carefully packed the prototype and all visible documents, Emily Grace felt the world collapse around her. Months of work, countless hours of dedication, the reconstructed dream, all confiscated in minutes by a legal maneuver she didn't fully understand. After the group's departure, Helen collapsed into a chair, aged 10 years in one afternoon. They didn't get the valve, she murmured, as fragile consolation. But without the prototype and without the documentation, we can't participate in the fair. Emily Grace remained silent, her body burning with fever, her mind clouded by exhaustion and crushing disappointment. Through the laboratory window, now empty and violated, she observed the setting sun tinting the sky orange and red, the same colors she had imagined seeing when the engine would be presented to the world. 3 days later, Emily Grace still hadn't returned to school. The fever had subsided, but a deep exhaustion, both physical and emotional, kept her bedridden. Helen visited daily, bringing news of the legal efforts to recover the prototype, but the prospects were discouraging. The judge denied our counterpart injunction, she informed on her last visit. The main process could take months, perhaps years. And the fair? Asked Emily Grace, her voice a weak whisper. In 4 days, replied Helen, sighing heavily. Technically, our registration is still valid, but without the prototype. The next morning, Richard appeared unexpectedly at Emily Grace's house. He seemed dejected and uncomfortable as Dorothy led him to her granddaughter's room. I heard you're sick, he said, sitting hesitantly on the edge of the bed. I came to see how you are. Emily Grace looked at him with an accusing gaze. Your company stole our prototype. Richard shook his head, genuinely disturbed. It wasn't my decision, Emily Grace. Paul convinced the board that you were violating the company's intellectual property. I was outvoted. The project was my grandfather's. He never sold the rights to anyone. Legally, the situation is complicated, explained Richard, carefully choosing his words. Samuel was an employee when he developed the initial concepts. The company can claim rights, even if morally questionable. A heavy silence hung between them. Finally, Richard continued in a low voice. I came because I need you to understand something. Everything I did, bringing you to the company, creating the special laboratory, was trying to correct an injustice from the past. I truly believed we could develop the project within Miller Automotive, give Samuel the deserved credit, do things right this time. But it didn't happen that way, stated Emily Grace bitterly. No, it didn't. And now we're all trapped in an impossible situation. Richard hesitated, then took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. I got this for you, a VIP invitation to the fair. Miller Automotive will be one of the main exhibitors. Emily Grace looked at the envelope as if it were an offense. You want me to go watch while your company presents our project as theirs? I want you to see with your own eyes what's happening, replied Richard enigmatically. Sometimes we need to fully understand the problem to find the solution. After Richard's departure, Emily Grace remained motionless, staring at the ceiling. The original valve, the only piece that remained of the project, was kept in the false bottom of the sock drawer, saved, but useless without the rest of the system. Her grandfather's dream, which for brief and precious months had seemed within reach, now seemed more distant than ever. That night, for the first time since her grandfather's passing, Emily Grace cried without reservations, not a child's tears, but the deep weeping of someone who understands the injustice of the world in its fullness. Dorothy, sitting beside her on the bed, just caressed her hair in silence, understanding that there are pains that words cannot alleviate. "I give up, Grandma," whispered Emily Grace when the tears finally ceased. "It's too big for me. I'm just a child." Dorothy continued the silent caress for a few moments before responding. "Your grandfather also gave up once, you know. After the Millers blocked his funding, after friends doubted, he put the notebooks in the drawer and said it was impossible to fight against the powerful." "And what made him continue?" "You," replied the grandmother simply. "When you were born, he held you in his arms and said, 'For her, I'll try again, so she can live in a better world.'" Emily Grace closed her eyes, letting the words penetrate her exhausted heart. Even so, the defeat seemed definitive this time, without a prototype, without documentation, without a platform to present the project, and now without strength to continue fighting. The invitation to the fair remained untouched on the desk for 2 days. On the morning of the 3rd day, Helen called, her voice carrying an unusual urgency. "I need you to come to Lakeside today, Emily Grace. I discovered something in the documents I managed to save, something that your grandfather hid from all of us." "What is it?" asked the girl without enthusiasm. "I can't explain over the phone, but it could change everything." Emily Grace hesitated, her heart divided between natural curiosity and the fear of feeding hopes only to see them destroyed again. "I don't know if I have the strength for more disappointments, Helen." On the other side of the line, the engineer's voice softened. "I understand, dear, I really understand. But if you decide to come, I'll be waiting. The choice is yours." The phone went silent, leaving Emily Grace alone with her tumultuous thoughts. Slowly, she dragged herself to the window, observing the children playing in the street, free, unconcerned, without the weight of impossible dreams on their small shoulders. Maybe it was time to join them again, to be just a 9-year-old, with a child's concerns, to forget valves, engines, and revolutionary systems, to forget promises to grandfathers who were no longer present to demand their fulfillment. On the desk, beside the fair invitation, the wrench-shaped pendant that Richard had given her seemed to observe her, silent and accusatory. Emily Grace picked it up, feeling its solid weight in the palm of her hand. For a brief moment, she considered throwing it away, getting rid of the symbol of a journey that had brought more pain than joy. Instead, she let it fall back onto the desk, where it clinked against something metallic, partially covered by school notebooks. The original valve, the last tangible piece of her grandfather's dream. That small masterpiece of engineering that, alone, could accomplish nothing. Like herself now, a solitary child, brilliant but powerless against forces much larger than her understanding or capacity to confront. Giving up had never seemed so logical, so inevitable. The adult world had shown its cruelest face, and she finally understood the lesson. Some dreams are too big for people too small. Night fell over Chicago with a fine drizzle that transformed the city lights into trembling blurs. Emily Grace remained at the window, observing the drops run down the glass, each one tracing its unique path until disappearing at the base. Like problems that seemed unsolvable until they found their natural solution, she thought. Helen's words continued echoing. In her mind, something that your grandfather hid from all of us could change everything. The valve rested in her hand, the cold metal gradually warming with the contact of her skin. She turned it repeatedly, examining every detail with eyes that had memorized its structure weeks ago. Nothing new seemed to emerge from this inspection, but something in the urgency of Helen's voice had planted a seed of curiosity that now grew, reluctant but persistent. "What are you telling me, Grandpa?" she whispered, as if the metal could answer. "What did we all miss?" Her attention turned to the fair invitation that Richard had left. In 2 days, Miller Automotive would present its revolutionary technology to the world. The prototype that she and Helen had built with such care would be exhibited as the company's creation, without mention of the true inventor, without recognition to the granddaughter who carried his legacy. The injustice burned like embers, reigniting something that Emily Grace thought she had lost, not just anger but determination. She looked at the clock, almost 9 at night. Late for a trip to Lakeside, but there was no school the next day. "Grandma," she called, entering the living room where Dorothy was watching her nightly soap opera, "I need to go to Lakeside tonight. It's important." The grandmother observed her attentively, noticing the renewed gleam in her granddaughter's eyes, the more erect posture, the slightly raised chin, subtle signs of a decision made. "So you're not giving up then?" Emily Grace shook her head. "I need to at least know what Helen discovered. If after that there's still no hope, then I'll accept the end." The rideshare driver who took them to Lakeside was a talkative gentleman who kept Dorothy entertained with stories about his grandchildren during the entire journey. Emily Grace remained silent, the valve secure in a small case in her backpack, her mind running through possibilities, seeking pieces of the puzzle that might have escaped. Helen received them at the door, her face lighting up upon seeing Emily Grace. "You came," she said simply with visible relief. In the partially empty laboratory, only a work table, some basic equipment, and a powerful lamp remained. Helen led Emily Grace to the table, where the original valve, the one they had hidden from seizure, was mounted on a small stand under intense light. "Look," instructed Helen, adjusting the lamp so that the light hit the metal piece at a specific angle. Emily Grace approached, frowning. "What am I looking for?" "Observe the internal surface. When the light hits at this specific angle, a pattern slowly emerged as Emily Grace adjusted her position, tiny markings on the metal surface, almost invisible to the naked eye, forming what appeared to be letters and numbers. "It's a microscopic engraving," explained Helen, handing a precision magnifying glass to the girl. "Your grandfather engraved this on the valve itself, in a location that would only be visible if you knew exactly where and how to look." Through the magnifying glass, Emily Grace could distinguish an alphanumeric sequence followed by geographic coordinates. "It's a code," she murmured, intrigued, "and a location." "The coordinates point to a small village in West Virginia," confirmed Helen. "I verified them. And as for the code," she made a significant pause, "it's a bank vault combination." Emily Grace's eyes widened. "A bank vault? You're saying Grandpa—" "Samuel was more strategic than any of us imagined," completed Helen, with admiration in her voice. "While everyone thought he had entrusted all his knowledge to the notebooks, he kept his most important secrets stored elsewhere. But what could be in that vault that would change our situation now?" Helen smiled, a smile that mixed astuteness and hope. "Yesterday, after discovering the engraving, I researched the bank branch at those coordinates. It's a small, local bank that has existed for more than 40 years. I called pretending to be a lawyer, verifying unclaimed inheritances. I discovered that the vault in Samuel Olson's name remains active, with annual fees being paid automatically from a linked account. So, whatever it is that Grandpa stored there, he wanted it to be found eventually," concluded Emily Grace, feeling the excitement grow. "Exactly. And considering the extreme care with which he hid this information, it must be something valuable. Something he wouldn't trust to notebooks that could be found." "We need to go there," decided Emily Grace instantly. "Tomorrow itself." "I've already organized everything," replied Helen with a mischievous gleam in her eyes. "My car is fueled, I've reserved a room at a local inn, and I've already verified the bank's operating hours. We leave at dawn, if your grandmother permits." Dorothy, who was observing the scene from the laboratory door, nodded silently. She had known Samuel better than anyone. If he had hidden something in that way, it had an important purpose. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, a small group departed toward West Virginia. Helen at the wheel, Dorothy in the passenger seat, and Emily Grace in the back seat. studying a map where the coordinates had been precisely marked. The journey took almost 6 hours on winding roads that cut through verdant mountains. The small town of Pine Valley turned out to be a peaceful place, with colonial mansions around a central square where an old church stood. On the corner of the square, a 2-story building with a conservative facade housed the only local bank branch. "We arrived too early," observed Helen, consulting her watch. "The bank only opens at 10. They used the time to have coffee at a typical bakery, where the smell of fresh bread and strong coffee enveloped the few morning customers. Emily Grace could barely contain her anxiety, fidgeting in her chair, drumming her fingers on the table, checking the clock every few minutes. "Patience. Emmy," advised Dorothy, covering her granddaughter's restless hand with her own. "Your grandfather waited years for this moment to arrive. We can wait another hour." When the bank finally opened, they faced the bureaucratic procedure to access the vault. Helen presented herself as the legal representative of the Olsen family, showing carefully prepared documents. Dorothy, as Samuel's widow, provided identification and signature. The manager, after meticulous verifications, finally led them to the vault room. "Number 227, he informed, indicating a medium-sized metal box embedded in the wall. "I'll need you to sign these access forms." After the manager's departure, Grace approached the vault, her hands slightly trembling. Helen handed her a paper where she had noted the code found on the valve. Carefully, the girl turned the dials, entering the alphanumeric combination. A soft click indicated the unlocking. The vault door opened without resistance, revealing its contents. A sealed metal box the size of a large book, with the name Olsen engraved on the lid. "You should open it," said Dorothy, emotional. "It was for you that he saved this." Emily Grace removed the box and placed it on the central table of the room. The lid opened easily, revealing an organized set of documents, detailed technical plans, handwritten notes, old photographs, and, most importantly, a sealed envelope addressed to "Whoever finds the valve." With careful fingers, Emily Grace opened the envelope and took out several sheets of paper, written in her grandfather's familiar handwriting. The first page began simply, "If you are reading this, you found my hidden message and understood its importance. I hope you are someone of pure heart, as what I keep here is not just technology, it is a vision for a better future." As she read, Emily Grace's face transformed, surprise, understanding, and finally, determination. The pages contained not just detailed technical explanations that didn't appear in the original notebooks, but also the complete history of the system's development, records of previous attempts by the Millers to appropriate the project, and, most crucially, legal documents. "Grandpa registered the patent," whispered Emily Grace, incredulous, holding an official certificate dated decades ago, in his personal name, not the company's. Helen examined the document, astonished. He registered through an independent office, not the company's lawyers, and he kept it in absolute secrecy. "There's more," continued Emily Grace, leafing through the documents. "Letters exchanged with Charles Miller where he explicitly refuses to sell the rights, records of meetings with witnesses, proof that the project was developed in his free time, not during company hours. Material sufficient to overturn any claim by Miller Automotive about ownership of the project," concluded Helen, a smile growing on her face. At the bottom of the box, a small USB storage device attracted Emily Grace's attention. Next to it, a handwritten note, "Visual demonstration of the system working, recorded 1 month before my departure, for when the world is ready." The way back to Chicago seemed endless, despite the renewed determination that energized the group. On the road, using Helen's laptop, they examined the content of the USB drive, a high-quality video showing Samuel Olsen explaining the system in detail, demonstrating its operation in a functional prototype, and explaining the biomimetic principles that made it revolutionary. "The fair is tomorrow," reminded Helen while driving. "Miller Automotive will make its big presentation at 2 p.m. according to the official program." "We'll be there," affirmed Emily Grace, methodically organizing the documents in her backpack. "But first, we need a lawyer." That night, gathered in the living room of Emily Grace's house, the lawyer recommended by Helen, a specialist in intellectual property, reviewed the documents with growing interest. "This is extraordinary," he commented, adjusting his glasses while examining the patent registration. "The patent is fully valid. It was regularly renewed through automatic payments. Legally, Samuel Olson and now his heirs are the only legitimate owners of the technology." "And what about tomorrow's presentation?" asked Emily Grace, concerned. "Can we stop them?" The lawyer carefully considered the question. A last-minute injunction would be difficult to obtain, but an astute smile appeared on his face. There are other forms of intervention. The next morning was a rush of preparations. The lawyer left early to register petitions and official notifications. Helen and Emily Grace reviewed each document, organizing them in logical sequence for presentation. Dorothy supervised the selection of appropriate clothes for the occasion. A simple but elegant dress for Emily Grace, replacing the school uniforms and casual clothes she usually wore. "Today you won't be just a girl," said the grandmother, adjusting the belt of the dress. "You'll be the legitimate heir of Samuel Olson, claiming what is yours by right." As the taxi took them to the convention center where the fair was happening, Emily Grace observed the city through the window, her reflection superimposing on the buildings and busy streets. A 9-year-old girl about to face a billion-dollar corporation, armed only with the truth and the courage her grandfather had transmitted to her, not through genes, but through worn notebooks and a revolutionary faculty. The convention center buzzed with activity. Executives in formal attire, enthusiastic engineers, potential investors, and journalists circulated among the stands where the latest technological innovations were displayed. The Miller Automotive stand stood out for its size and opulence. Illuminated panels, presentations on high-definition screens, and in the center, covered by a blue velvet cloth, what could only be the prototype. Paul Sanders personally supervised the final preparations, checking the teleprompter where his speech was programmed, while technicians adjusted lights and sound for the big moment. Richard was absent, noted Emily Grace, as they positioned themselves strategically near the stand but not visible to the company team. "We arrived in time," whispered Helen, consulting the fair program. "The presentation begins in 20 minutes. "Emily." Grace nodded, feeling her heart race. In her school backpack, the same, worn and patched, that she had carried since the beginning of this journey, rested the documents that could change everything. The original story repeated itself. Small child underestimated and ignored, about to challenge everyone's expectations. "Are you ready?" asked Helen, gently squeezing her shoulder. Emily Grace took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the pendant in the shape of a wrench that now hung around her neck, no longer a symbol of failure, but a reminder of the path traveled. "Ready." Visitors began to gather around the Miller Automotive stand, attracted by the announcement of a revolutionary sustainable technology about to be revealed. Video cameras positioned themselves strategically. Journalists prepared recorders and notepads. The stage was set for what the company hoped would be its moment of glory. And at the edge of the crowd, almost invisible among anxious adults, a 9-year-old girl waited for the precise moment to rewrite the ending of this story. Visitors crowded in front of the Miller Automotive stand as Paul Sanders climbed onto the small stage, his confident smile illuminated by strategically positioned spotlights. Behind him, the prototype, still covered by blue velvet, attracted curious gazes. The expectation was palpable in the air. "Ladies and gentlemen," began Paul, his voice amplified by the sound system, "Miller Automotive is proud to present a revolution in vehicular propulsion technology, the biomimetic hybrid system." Polite applause ran through the audience. Emily Grace and Helen exchanged determined looks as they moved discreetly to a more strategic position near the central corridor. Dorothy and the lawyer remained a bit behind, observing attentively. "After years of intensive research and substantial investment," continued Paul, "our team developed a system that reduces fuel consumption by up to 70%, maintaining full power and compatibility with existing infrastructure. The presentation continued with impressive graphics and technical terms that Emily Grace recognized from her grandfather's own notebooks. Paul described each innovative aspect as the company's exclusive creation, without any mention of Samuel, Olsen, or the original work. "And now," announced Paul with theatrical flourish, "it is with great pride that we reveal the heart of this innovation." Two assistants removed the velvet, revealing the prototype, the same one that had been confiscated from Helen's laboratory, now with the company logo prominently displayed. The crowd applauded enthusiastically, while camera flashes captured the moment. Emily Grace felt her heart race. It was time. She firmly squeezed Helen's hand and advanced to the central corridor, the most important document secure in her hands. Helen discreetly signaled to the lawyer, who approached a sound technician positioned at the side of the stand. "Our engineers develop—" Paul abruptly interrupted himself when he noticed the small figure in the central corridor, looking directly at him with unwavering determination. "Continuing," he resumed, averting his gaze, "our engineers developed a revolutionary regulator valve that valve was created by my grandfather, Samuel Olsen." Emily Grace's clear and firm voice echoed through the environment, amplified by a microphone that the sound technician, following instructions from the lawyer, had strategically activated. An astonished silence dominated the space. All heads turned to the source of the interruption, a 9-year-old girl, erect and dignified in her simple dress, confronting one of the most powerful executives in the American industry. "Security!" called Paul, his composure momentarily shaken. "Remove this child, please." "Before they remove me," continued Emily Grace, her voice now stronger, "everyone here should know that this technology has a single legal owner, the Olsen family." She raised the document in her hands, the original patent registration, with the official seal clearly visible even from a distance. "I have here the original patent registration, filed by inventor Samuel Olsen in 1987, regularly renewed since then, and never transferred to Miller Automotive." The security guards hesitated, looking to Paul for guidance. Journalists, suddenly more interested, approached with recorders and cameras. The buzz quickly grew among those present. "This is absurd," protested Paul, trying to regain control. "This child is clearly confused and—" "This child," interrupted a strong voice from the back of the hall, "is the legitimate heir of Samuel Olsen and the true intellectual owner of the system you are presenting." Richard Miller advanced through the corridor, surprising everyone. He wore an impeccable suit, but his face showed an unexpected resolution. He stopped beside Emily Grace, placing his hand on her shoulder in a gesture of support. "Richard, have you lost your mind?" hissed Paul, quickly descending from the stage to confront him. "On the contrary, Paul. I finally found it." Richard turned to the now completely attentive audience. "As CEO of Miller Automotive, I owe a public apology and a clarification. This system was indeed originally developed by Samuel Olsen, a misunderstood genius who worked in our company decades ago." Murmurs of surprise ran through the audience. Paul visibly paled, while Emily Grace observed astonished this unexpected ally. "Our company never legally acquired the rights to this project," continued Richard, ignoring Paul's silent protests. "We tried to develop it internally with the help of his granddaughter, Emily Grace Olsen, the girl you see here. But after a technical failure, we opted for the wrong path." Helen approached, positioning the laptop where her grandfather's video was ready to be displayed. "We have here an original recording of the inventor demonstrating the working system, explaining its fundamental principles, and detailing his vision." A technician, sensing the dimension of the moment, quickly connected the laptop to the main projection system. The image of Samuel Olsen filled the giant screen, a middle-aged man with the same intense eyes as Emily Grace, explaining with contagious passion the technology he had created. "This system wasn't developed to enrich corporations," explained Samuel in the video, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "It was created to democratize access to clean technology, to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, to build a more sustainable future for our children and grandchildren." Paul, realizing he was losing control of the situation, tried one last gambit. "This is an orchestrated farce. This video could have been manipulated. This patent could be falsified. The patent was verified this morning by the National Intellectual Property Office, intervened the lawyer, advancing with additional documents. We have here the official confirmation, as well as legal notifications already sent to the Directorate of Miller Automotive. Cameras and microphones now surrounded Emily Grace, who remained serene at the center of the storm. A journalist approached. "Do you really understand this technology? Can you explain it?" Emily Grace looked at Helen, who nodded encouragingly, and then at Richard, who smiled with genuine pride. Taking a deep breath, she addressed not just the journalist but everyone present. "The system created by my grandfather isn't just a technical evolution, it's a conceptual revolution," she began, her voice gaining confidence with each word. He observed how plants process energy from multiple sources and applied those principles to automotive engineering. The regulator valve he created allows an engine to alternate between different fuels without loss of efficiency, adapting like a living organism adapts to its environment. To the amazement of many, she proceeded to explain complex principles of thermodynamics, mechanical engineering, and biomimetics with the clarity and precision of an expert, but the communicative simplicity of a child. Journalists furiously took notes, engineers nodded impressed, and even competing executives approached to hear better. When she finished her explanation, a reverent silence dominated the environment, suddenly broken by spontaneous applause that quickly transformed into an ovation. Paul Sanders had discreetly disappeared in the midst of the confusion, but few noticed his absence. Richard resumed the microphone. "On behalf of Miller Automotive, I officially recognize Samuel Olson as the legitimate inventor of this system and his granddaughter Emily Grace Olson as the heir to his rights. Our company is ready to negotiate a fair agreement that respects the original vision of the inventor." Turning to Emily Grace, he continued, "And this agreement will be on the terms that you determine, Emily Grace, because your grandfather was right. This technology should not serve only for profit but for a greater good." The next day, the story dominated headlines across the country. 9-year-old girl revolutionizes automotive industry. Heir of forgotten genius recovers stolen legacy. Little inventor confronts corporate giant and wins. Photos of Emily Grace explaining the technology circulated on social networks, inspiring young scientists and inventors throughout the United States. 2 weeks later, in a special press conference, Emily Grace, accompanied by Helen, Richard, and representatives from universities and research institutes, announced the creation of the Samuel Olson Foundation for Sustainable Technology. "My grandfather's vision wasn't just to create a better engine," she explained, with the same serenity that had impressed everyone at the fair. "It was to build a future where advanced technology would be accessible to all, where innovation would serve people, not just profits." The revolutionary model proposed by the foundation would allow small workshops, cooperatives, and technical schools to use the technology for free for educational and community purposes, while commercial applications would generate funds for more research and development. Richard, now president of the foundation's board, had resigned from the presidency of Miller Automotive to dedicate himself to the project. "I found my true purpose," he confided to journalists, "and a family I had lost." 6 months after the fair, the first car equipped with the Olson system arrived on the market, accessible, efficient, and revolutionary. The valve that had started it all was displayed in a glass box in the small museum of the foundation, along with the original notebooks and a photograph of Samuel. Emily Grace, now with 10 recently completed years, divided her time between school, where she had founded a science club for children interested in engineering, and the institute, where she supervised educational projects and participated in advanced research as a special consultant. At home in Hope Hill, life had changed. The family now occupied a comfortable house, Dorothy received the best medical care, and the twins attended a good school. But some things remained unchanged, like the nights when Emily Grace sat on the porch observing the city lights in the distance, the pendant in the shape of a wrench always around her neck. On one of those nights, Helen found her contemplating the stars. "What are you thinking about, little engineer?" Emily Grace smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "About how small pieces can change entire mechanisms. About how small people can change the world. About how my grandfather knew this all along." Helen nodded, sitting beside her. "And what comes next?" The girl pointed to the starry sky. "Now we expand the horizon. Grandpa used to say that each solution opens the door to new questions. We have a lot of work ahead." That night, while the city slept, a 10-year-old girl scribbled in a new notebook. Not just a child's dreams, but visions for a future that she was helping to build, one piece at a time. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily Grace's story has touched your hearts. To continue this journey of discoveries and overcoming, we've prepared a special playlist with other stories of extraordinary young people who transformed adversities into opportunities. Find it by clicking on the icon to the left of the screen. If this little engineer won your hearts as she conquered the world, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on this video. Daily we share narratives that, like well-calibrated engines, move our emotions and propel us forward. Don't miss our upcoming